Hello again. We have now reached the fifth part of our series on the Battle of Siffin. So far, we have followed the footprints of our main characters in time. We saw how Ali took a major role in the battles of Badr and Uhud. The Battle of Uhud would have been a second triumph for Islam had it not been for the disobedience of a few Muslims. This turned the tide of battle in favor of the Meccan army, and in the aftermath of this battle, Muawiyah's mother Hind desecrated the bodies of the fallen Muslims, including the body of Hamza. Yet after Uhud, Islam was still at large, and this was not the outcome the polytheists of Mecca wanted. So further conflict was inevitable, and this was to take shape in the form of the Battle of Trench. This time, the Meccans were significantly reinforced. 5 tribes from the local areas had joined force with Abu Sufyan and formed a confederacy against Islam. Hence, the Battle of Trench is also referred to as Al-Ahzab, meaning the Confederates. The combined might of the Confederates then headed for Medina. This was an army of over 10,000 men against Muhammad's much smaller army of 3,000. In March 627 CE, the Confederates reached Medina. But to their surprise, they found their way to the city blocked by a series of trenches. Indeed, Muhammad had been informed of the formation of the Confederacy and had begun preparing for their arrival in advance. The idea of digging trenches was unheard of amongst the tribes of Arabia. This stratagem had been proposed to Muhammad by his follower Salman, who was a convert from the Sassanid Persia. Salman had seen similar tactics used by his countrymen. Now, the Confederates were forced to lay siege to Medina. This was a siege they had not come prepared for. Despite holding Medina under siege for almost a month, the Confederates failed to break the Muslims' defense line except on one occasion. This came at the climax of the battle and resulted in an encounter between Amr ibn Abdul Wud, the champion of the Meccan army, against none other than Ali. Amr had discovered the narrowest part in the trenches and managed to cross it with 4 other riders unharmed. Seeing this, Ali quickly moved his regiment to block the gap Amr had entered through. Here, Amr began taunting the Muslims to come and face him in one-to-one combat. None dared to take up this challenge, except Ali. The Prophet prayed for Ali's protection. Afterwards, the champions faced off in dismounted combat. A cloud of dust rose from the commotion, and no one could see what was happening. If Amr were to win, he then would likely be able to open the way for the rest of the Confederates into the city. Both armies stood with bated breath, in waiting to see which champion would emerge victorious and turn the tide of battle to their favor. Once the dust had settled, they saw Ali sitting on top of Amr victoriously. It is said that Amr wore an expensive suit of armor, but Ali was magnanimous in his victory and refrained from stripping Amr's body of his armor. Afterwards, Ali presented himself before the Prophet, who assessed the value of his triumph by these words: "This excels the good deeds of all mankind." Indeed, because of the defeat of the greatest champion of infidelity, the Muslims became honorable and the infidels degraded and humble. In the aftermath of this encounter, the Confederates began to squabble amongst themselves. In addition to their low morale, they were also becoming short of food and supplies. It is also narrated that at this point, the weather conditions became extremely hostile, making it difficult for the Confederates to even hold camp. This left the Meccans with no option but to abandon their ill-prepared siege and return home. The Battle of Trench was a major disaster for the polytheists of Mecca. A considerable amount of money and manpower had gone into the last 3 campaigns against the Muslims. Mecca was losing power and nearing its demise, whilst Islam was continuously growing. Hence, some of the polytheists began to wonder whether switching side would be the only way of preserving their position. In the year following the Battle of Trench, Muhammad began planning for a peaceful pilgrimage to Mecca. He made the polytheist tribes of Arabia aware of this intention and even invited them to join him on this spiritual journey. Performing pilgrimage to Mecca, or in other words, Hajj, was an old tradition amongst the Arabs since the time of their forefather, Prophet Ishmael. So this invitation came as a surprise, as the polytheists thought Muhammad opposed all their traditions and ceremonies, including Hajj. Indeed, this was an incredibly wise proposition by Muhammad which served two purposes. Firstly, this amicable invitation reduced the fear of the Muslims amongst the polytheists. Secondly, this put Quraysh under pressure. If they allowed this pilgrimage to take place, it would become a platform for Muhammad to spread his message. And if they prevented it, they would be compromising their own authority by obstructing Arabs from performing their sacred traditional ceremony. In 628 CE, Muhammad sets for Hajj. He orders his followers to carry no weapons except for a sword which travelers carried to protect themselves. It is reported that over 1,400 people accompanied Muhammad on this journey. However, the Quraysh decided to block this pilgrimage and sent Khalid ibn Walid with a cavalry regiment to ensure the Muslims would not reach Mecca. This forced Muhammad into changing course and stopping at a place called Hudaibiyah. Here, he then engaged in diplomacy with the Quraysh and made his peaceful intentions for the pilgrimage known to them. In the end, a peace treaty was negotiated between Muhammad and the Quraysh. This treaty is known as the Treaty of Hudaibiyah, which was to last for 10 years, preventing any further conflict between the two sides and their allies. Furthermore, the two sides agreed that the Muslims would be allowed to return the next year and perform pilgrimage. And as promised, the following year the Prophet visited Mecca and performed Hajj. After 7 hard years, Muhammad was finally able to return to his birthplace. Mecca had a chance to hear Muhammad's invitation to Islam once again, and more than ever before, people's hearts were turning towards Islam. Even those whose hearts were not turning could see the writing on the wall. Alas, this peace was not to last. In 629 CE, the Quraysh violated its terms by attacking the tribe of Bani Khuza'ah who were allied to the Muslims. Bani Khuza'ah then sent words to Muhammad and requested help. The Prophet immediately accepted their request and began preparing to capture Mecca. Now, the tables had turned. In the last 3 encounters, it was the Meccans who had fielded the larger and better equipped armies. But this time Muhammad commanded 10,000 well-armed men for the conquest of his homeland. Muhammad had even done his preparations for battle in secret, and his army's arrival came as a sudden surprise to Abu Sufyan. Subsequently, and under the instructions of Abbas ibn Abdul Muttalib, Muhammad's uncle, Abu Sufyan submitted to the Prophet and accepted to convert to Islam. In return, the Prophet granted amnesty to Abu Sufyan and whoever sought refuge in his house. Following this, the Muslims managed to enter the city with almost no resistance. Muhammad then took oaths of allegiance from the people of Mecca. He then emptied the house of God from all the idols. 8 years ago, Muhammad had to leave Mecca under the cover of darkness to escape his own kinsmen from assassinating him. Now he returned triumphant with his enemies subdued and submitting to him. The occupation of Mecca was a huge turning point in Muawiyah's life. After 20 years of opposition, Muawiyah and his father had to surrender to Muhammad. As there is no record of Muawiyah converting to Islam prior to the conquest of Mecca, it is safe to assume that this came later to this. For the first time, Ali and Muawiyah apparently seem to be on the same side. But will this remain after Muhammad's passing? Stay tuned to find out. Until next time, goodbye.